What is going on, guys? Ricky in the Flip Lab. Today, I'm here with Tracy Royce. She has been killing the game out in Phoenix for a long time, and happy to have you here. First woman on the Flip Lab podcast after 2 years.
I'm super excited to be here and so proud to represent.
Yeah. So let people kind of know about your story. How did you originally get into real estate, and where did you kind of get inspiration to get started?
So I had worked behind the scenes for other investors for a long time. Let's just call it like the better part of a decade. And that's when the market was crashing and people were like, we think like we're moving into a crash now, and people want to try to compare it to what was happening in the early 2000s. And it's nothing like that, right? It's two totally different animals, but that's the market where I cut my teeth. And by that, I mean pre-foreclosures, short sales, going down to the auctions, like when it was crazy down there. So creative real estate, creative dispo, anything and everything that you can think of that wasn't traditional real estate is essentially like what I grew up around in this business. And I did that for a while. Like I said, about a decade, simply because I was super young at the time, had some stuff going on in my family, and just didn't feel confident to do this on my own.
Yeah.
And then at some point I reached this conclusion that I'm like, I'm never going to feel 1,000% ready. And if I can help make these guys millionaires, maybe if I just did a portion of what they're doing, maybe I can do that for myself too. So that morphed into doing short sales on my own, building a brand, learning construction, because that was never part of what I did for them. And eventually just getting into what I do now, which is a full-time fix and flipper, landlord, designer, and podcasting and content creator.
I know real estate has become like, I didn't know you have to be like a full-time influencer to be doing deals on real estate these days.
Right. It's just part of the package now. Yeah.
So I know you were in kind of like the market last time. It kind of downturned. I talked to a lot of people who haven't been through that last downturn. What would you say is like right now the similarities and differences you're seeing from like that 2008, 2009 time?
The similarities that I'm seeing would be the emotions. And as much as we like to look at economics from a, supply and demand, we're supposed to be rational thinking machines that, buy things based on those basics. We don't. We tend to see what the herd is doing and we freak out and buy based on that. And so we're seeing a lot of that right now, and the expectation that for those of us that were around that had that got burned. I mean, again, I was working behind the scenes, but privy to all of it, who got really burned by it. Afraid of like the worst case scenario happening again. The problem with that is it tends to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So I think there's a big holding pattern of like, isn't or is it right now? So that I see in similarity, but I do think that there is enough people out there saying this is how it's different economically. Hopefully it won't start to go towards that direction for the worst case. The differences that I'm seeing, though, are really interesting. Last time, we did not have these huge institutional hedge funds that had come into the marketplace and done so much purchasing and holding and not as much reselling. And then also, social media was around, but you didn't see the rapidity of information sharing like we do now either.
Yeah.
So last time when I was working for other real estate investors, like all this creative sort of mashup of different types of acquisition and dispo strategies had to be created fairly quickly. Okay. And people started utilizing it. And maybe there was 2 or 3 groups of people in Phoenix that really understood how to capitalize on the downturn. Okay. Now it's like there's daily news coming out, and how do you do subject to, and how do you do creative dispo? It's like what used to maybe take 6 months to a year to get out there in the ecosphere of like, how do we make sense of all of this? It's like 6 hours now. Yeah. And so I think that if you really are trying to see a silver lining as a new investor, is there is a huge community, regardless of the actual physical community that you, and like you and I are here in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. But just online and generally speaking, a lot of you newer investors might be freaking out about how do I make sense of all this? It's like there's forums, there's Facebook forums, there's communities, there's podcasts, there's meetups.
It's almost like too much information, I feel like, these days, where people are like, I need to figure everything else out, but they're not like taking enough action too.
That's not wrong.
It's like a double-edged sword sometimes if you just get stuck in that learning mode, which I see a lot. And I don't know if it's always been like that within the real estate space. I
think, to your point, that's a really good observation, because it's like when there wasn't as much social media, you might not have had as many exposure to this much all the time. There was always courses and education that you could go to, and people would just be, you know, it's like the whole old adage of like buying the course, but never taking the wrapping off, because it's like the next new shiny thing comes along.
Yeah.
But I think there is a multiplier of that with social media. So what I would say as a value add is pick something that seems like it's going to work in your marketplace, and just take that and run with it, because you might not have a huge runway to make it work, you know, meaning that sort of model might change in the next few years. So if it looks like it might work, just get in, dive in, do the work, keep your blinders on, and make it happen. Yeah, like when the hedge funds were buying really heavy, I wish I would have just like doubled down during that time and tried to sell them as many deals. We had a few, we started selling deals to hedge funds, I think in March. And like March and April, we sold like 30 deals to the hedge funds. Just like new stuff that was on market. $30,000 rips, dude, like new listings on shitty Mesa houses. That's what's up. And you know, once the market turned though, whatever, you know, come, I think it was like June, they stopped buying. Yeah. We haven't sold, I think we sold like one to a hedge fund since. So that strategy that was working for a while, all of a sudden kind of stopped working. That's a perfect example. Like, instead of, I'm going to go learn about hedge funds, and I'm going to learn about the history of iBuyers, and I'm going to set up this perfect website, and I'm going to like get out there, market, figure out the connections, and just, you know, clean it up as you go along. That's it. And that's a perfect example of things not lasting very long, I think, as much anymore. Yeah. And right now I've been thinking too, like we're still doing some deals in New Jersey. Arizona's been pretty slow for us. And from a wholesale side, I just feel like we're kind of in this stagnant market, like you were saying, where people aren't sure, like, is it going to crash? Is it not going to crash? And I feel like just during that stagnant time, it's hard to wholesale really well, because the buyers, they're the first ones that kind of like pull back, and they're getting conservative because they don't, you know, they have scars and battle wounds from last time. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, you're not seeing sellers really totally get convinced that the market is going down. Well, and there's different, I mean, the motivation of the sellers is typically, hey, I'm incentivized to make double what I ever thought I'd make on my house. But now they're faced with the very, you know, stark reality of, if I step out, even with this lump sum of cash in my hands, having to pay a 6% interest rate, which, by the way, is historically normal. Yeah, it's like a pretty normal rate. It's a totally normal rate. But when you're looking to trade what you're living in versus what that money would buy, could be two very different things. And so they're really not incentivized. And it's the majority of sellers, I want to say between 75 and 85%, that have a mortgage interest rate under like 4%, you know? So there's a very small amount of sellers that need to sell, want to sell, maybe have a high interest rate and have some sort of motivation to, or necessity, I should say, to actually get out of that property. And then on the buyer side, I'll even say as a flipper, you know, if I'm going to be in this thing for the next 120 days, let's say that's my average, it's having to forward look and forward guess what that resale value might be, and maybe even tick down a little bit on that. And then also my supply costs have gone up, labor costs are, you know, holding steady. But it's also having to get things at such a steep discount that I can buffer for all of that. And that's been the difficult part, because I love buying from wholesalers, but you guys are having the hard time of having those conversations with the sellers to get them low enough that you can make a healthy rip, but I also have enough margin. That's the trouble, the challenge, I should say, that a lot of us are having right now. Yeah, when like the market was good, like sellers never are on the side of the people that sold to flippers that lost a bunch of money over the past few months. Like, no one ever feels bad for selling their deals to that flipper. Right. But the sellers never kind of want to be on that other end. They always think like, oh, the investors, oh, they're making all this money, this and that. It's like, it could work out that way.
but it might not work out that way too. So I just think it's going to take some time. Like eventually life, I think, does kind of happen. Like you were saying, people could stay put for so long. It's like, oh, let's ride it out. Let's see what interest rates do. But eventually, you know, their kids are graduating from college and they got to move. So I think at some point you're going to see people kind of being a little bit more at mercy to the market that aren't just those super like distressed sellers. Those sellers are always, doesn't matter if the market's up or down, if someone inherits a property or gets in a bad position, I feel like those are always good deals. But it's those ones where they kind of want the easy button, where we were picking them up maybe at 65% and selling them at 70%.
Yeah.
They're not really willing to sell at 55% and then sell to you at like 60%.
So I think that that's where the people that are adapting and learning, because if you're just coming in as a cash buyer, the convenience factor, the ability to, you know, you can move out whenever you want, you're going to have to introduce like some other ways to be able to help these sellers into your lexicon. And that can look like creative acquisition, that can look like leasebacks, that can look like seller carries throughout the transaction. So it's like a win-win-win. And that takes a lot more nuance, and that takes education, and that takes a certain underlying debt, you know, and that you just have to understand that. And yes, it's different. It doesn't necessarily have to be more difficult, but it's just not going to be the same. And so I think, you know, what I teach too is when you're having a conversation with the seller, it's a one-page sheet that I go through, but it asks all of these questions. So that way, if it ends up being to where you can do creative finance, you have that information in front of you to be able to present to your end buyers that potentially like, maybe we can approach this in a different way that I can still, like you as a wholesaler can still make a healthy rip on it. And then there's still a profit in it for me too, because a lot of what we're actually discussing is affordability, right?
Yeah.
The sellers being able to afford to be able to sell and then actually buy something else. And me as a buyer being able to afford to do all the things that I need to do with a healthy margin. And then the end buyer that buys my product being able to afford the house at 6% interest rates or whatever it is. Yeah. So a lot of that I think is just having a deeper understanding of what other options can we offer to people that it's like a win-win-win-win.
Yeah, I had Ray Spencer. Do you know Ray?
Name sounds super familiar.
Yeah, he's a creative finance guy. And actually, like, I posted a video from our podcast on TikTok. It's got like 600,000 views in the last couple of days.
Good for him.
And
for
all
guys.
these comments are going crazy because he bought a $1.2 million house, zero money down.
I just saw your TikTok. Yeah, I saw that.
You saw it? Yeah, 0% interest over 50 years. So he's getting into this house with no money down, you know, debt not in his, 0% interest and $2,000 a month. To live in a $1 million plus house, which is like,
good job, Ray.
Right. if you went and tried to get a mortgage on that right now, it's 6-7%. And people are like, you know, that's not possible. Why would someone ever do that?
Right.
And it was, you know, an older lady, and she needed, she really just wanted 1.2. That was like her number. She didn't need cash now. Yeah. She didn't want to leave this big project house to her kids one day or something. So they're just going to collect $2,000 a month for however long, you know, when she's passes, it's like her kids just collect that, which I don't think it's the worst thing.
The interesting thing about what you just said, what comes to mind is the people that don't think it's possible don't know how to ask the right questions. Yeah. You haven't been taught to ask better questions. So what you and I might think is, that's totally possible. It's not normal. It's not taught a lot. And there hasn't been a need for it because it's been such that we'll all just offer cash, close quick. The market keeps going up. What could possibly go wrong here? Yeah, it hasn't been like really a needed solution for a while. Yeah. Unless that's the market that you are always seeking out. But again, sellers haven't been as incentivized to even be open to that. So again, I think that's why as things have evolved on social media, a lot of people do have exposure to these creative methods, but learning it and implementing it and being successful with it are different things too. So yeah, definitely the case. And we're pivoting towards that because it's just like the wholesale stuff is getting tough. So just adding more to your tool belt where, you know, if you actually do have someone, they like want to sell, they need to sell. And like in Ray's situation, the lady's house was sitting on market for 120 days. Right. So like she had a realtor involved and everything. And this was just, you know, her solution. She was probably getting financed offers at $950 and they were asking for a bunch of repairs now because
I'm sure you're seeing like retail buyers are getting back to having a little ground to stand on.
Right.
You know, like actually fix this or, you know, make a repair. When in like 2021 it was like.
You like it or you don't.
Yeah. Take it or leave it.
Yes.
10K hard EMD, 0-day inspection period, which.
And you're welcome. Yep.
Yeah. So it's interesting times. Do you pick up stuff creatively yourself?
I have before. Yeah. Actually, my last house I bought, sub 2. I love creative finance, but again, there just hasn't been a big need for it. I don't do as much seller direct marketing anymore, so I'm not belly to belly with a lot of sellers like I used to, but having the understanding of it and then being out in the ecosphere of like sharing stuff, or when people bring me deals, I'm like, hey, have you asked them this? Could we approach it like that? But I see other wholesalers, and in fact, yesterday I was talking to one of my good wholesaler friends. They've pivoted their entire team to start using creative finance as well. So that way they can resell it with creative financing too.
Yeah, when deals were hot, like I was saying, and a new listing would come up and I could sell it to a hedge fund and make 30K, it was kind of like, don't waste time and energy trying to make a deal work. Like it's either like it should make sense or not. But in this current market, there's not a lot of deals out there in general. So I think it's worth spending more time of, hey, like let's try to work this in 5 different ways and see if there's an actual solution that makes sense for the seller.
And to your point, that's part of, even as a flipper, because I'm also a landlord. Sorry, I totally got distracted by this.
Oh, that whiskey bottle.
The whiskey bottle that also looks like a rifle. Yeah. Nothing like being in a boys lab. Looking at deals different ways. So like the rental market has softened a little bit as far as like lease prices, but I can't be a one trick pony, right? If all I could do was buy a house at 70 cents on the dollar, 65 cents on the dollar and flip it, like I'm always only as good as my last deal. Same thing with wholesalers. So I'm looking at things from several different ways. I'm like, if there's money to be made, if there's music that's going to come out of this instrument, how can we make it work? So same thing, you know, it's taking me longer to look at deals. It's taking me longer to underwrite deals, but I'm fine with that because things don't seem to be moving as rapidly as they used to, where it was like, hey, I need to know in this phone call or it's gone, which was the case.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, in April, it was like, you know, you would talk to an agent that the coming soon went live 5 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I've had 30 phone calls already. Like, you better get it in the next hour. And like, it was crazy. So I just think it's that time where you got to kind of adjust your strategy a little bit and adapt to kind of what the market's giving you, and not just, I just hate the feeling of like waiting on the sidelines, kind of like, I'm just kind of waiting like, oh, well, hopefully like the hedge funds start buying again, or like hopefully either prices, like I would even rather at this point, like prices just completely plummet or kind of go back up. But just that stagnant time is, like I said, it's just tough to kind of find spreads, and people aren't, you're still not getting sellers like completely panic selling because prices haven't really, I mean, there hasn't been a need to panic. And
right.
If there is or isn't, I think is like you were talking about earlier, it could be a self-prophecy almost, where people just start panicking, and then all it takes is like a few and the dominoes start kind of falling in a neighborhood.
And I think where we would have saw that is at the end of last year. I mean, it's only the June or January right now, but investors tend to lead the pack with that because we're not emotionally attached to this inventory. Like, it's another slab of meat to me, you know? So it's just like, listen, if we just need to cut bait on this thing, it's better to do that now than to wait it out and keep paying our carrying costs or watch the neighbors keep lowering their prices. And so you saw that the data showed that investors were typically the ones doing the majority of the price cuts because we think rationally because we treat it like product. It's not like where our kids grew up in and that have any sort of emotional tie to it.
Sally's house is a piece of shit and she sold for 600. Like,
my cabinets are different and my house is better. So you don't see that. And it's just every direction that you look, there's an argument for whatever you think is going to happen. I mean, we just got the jobs market report today and it's like, it's going strong. What we thought were all these tech layoffs being the canary in the coal mine, that's not the case. You're looking at a very small percentage of, an industry that's getting laid off. But when you look at the overall picture, our unemployment is lower than it's ever been. And then if you go out even further than that to like a 30,000 foot view, Arizona has just so many strong macroeconomics. And we're about to step into Super Bowl being here, all of the events that happen in February. So it's going to be weird here because we're going to see all this activity. And so it's like, is it going to be like this, how it is for a while? Is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? You have an argument either way, I think. So I'm with you. It's a little bit weird to be like, just something happened. We know how to operate better. But it's strange when sellers are staying put, buyers are really trepidatious. I think we're all trying to adjust to that together.
Yeah. Are you currently still buying new flips?
Yeah, I mean, I'll buy. But again, I'm underwriting like, could I keep it as a rental? Could I flip it? And I'm trying to buy on margins that make sense either way. So my bread and butter has just always been entry level and move up price point. You know, I've gone a little bit above that, but I try to just stay within my wheelhouse. That sort of product tends to move better and faster anyway. And then my sort of magic fairy dust on it has been, how do I make an entry level house look more designer? And so that's what I've really honed in on. And you don't really have to spend that much more, if anything more, on material costs. It's just kind of a way of like how you put things together.
Yeah.
Right. And so it tends to really gratify buyers' needs for, like, you know, we've all been so spoiled with HGTV. That's like the expectation. And so having a cute designer house that's well put, looks clean, has curb appeal to it, actually has done a good job on the flip, like a quality product. I know that that's like weird to actually do your job well. But I just stick within that. And I just find I feel a lot more insulated from whatever the market does, because even if it goes up, 10%, if it goes down 10%, you're not getting slaughtered.
Yeah.
It's not like you're doing, it's not like in the 500 to 700 range where it's just like a 10% kick, or 10% if it goes down 10, or you have to take 10% off of that to get it moved. It's like, that's a healthy chunk.
Or if you're carrying like hard money costs at, whatever, 500,000. I mean, I was just in a Templeton Walkers in the Imans, they're doing like a $4 or $5 million flip in Central Phoenix.
Yeah.
And the carrying cost on that's like $27,000 a month.
Yeah. Wow.
So, you know what I mean? Like, like if you're carrying massive holding costs too, it's like the longer days on market is really eating at your profits.
Daily, you're just like.
But if you're staying in like that lower price range, I do think that's, even in New Jersey, we've always kind of stayed in that range. But I think our flips got beat up once the market turned because we didn't do them really nice. Like that was never our bread and butter. It was kind of like, whatever, slap some paint on the walls.
Well, but you didn't have to, and that's the thing, is you didn't have to. And that's where the majority of people that are like, flipping doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work if you're not being principled about it, because you never had to. You didn't really have to look at, well, I really need to stay at X% LTV, because if I'm not counting on appreciation and I factor in all these costs that go into it, man, I got to make something here. I have to make it doesn't need to be like a 20% margin, but it has to be healthy. And many people are forgetting that never goes away. A well-priced, well-renovated, especially entry and move-up level property, that's always a necessary product, especially now. People don't want to fix stuff up. They want the keys. They want to feel good. They want to get their family in there.
Yeah. So. And when you look on market, a lot, like 80, 90%, it's beat up stuff that when the market was hot, it would sell. So if you come with something that like looks designer worthy, right? I just think that's like a pretty good spot to be. What are like some little things that you're doing to kind of make your flip stand out?
Right. So a lot of this I teach in flip school as well, because the go-to-market itemization of like everything that you need to do, I just run it really systemized. And it's funny that the little things that I would think of as normal, because I'm just very particular about things, like it's my product, and I want to stand by it. And, reputationally too, I want to, I don't want to leave a trail of like shitty houses around Phoenix.
right. Tracy putting out another shit project.
Brought to you by but just little things like, making sure it's broom swept and the staging looks great and someone has walked with a fresh pair of eyes before you go to market with your blue tape, and making sure that, your finished person does all of those, that the pictures are professional. There's nothing that makes me want to reach through the computer screen and strangle someone than when I see this picture, Ricky. And you know what I'm talking about in the bathroom. Like, you just spent 40, 50 grand on this rehab, and your bleep agent can't even go in there and spend a couple $100 to do pictures. Like, that's such an injustice. But you as a flipper, ultimately it's your responsibility, man. Like, you need to direct the show here. Like, even if it's a circus, get everyone in line, you know, and make sure that you're directing everything such that it's just like, this needs to be 100% ready before we go to market. So I know it sounds stupid obvious to say like, hey, professional pictures and staging, but a lot of that wasn't necessary. And so it just goes over their head like, oh, that's what makes a difference. Put yourself in a buyer's shoes, especially like if you really think about it. And I don't want to say dumb it down. I'm not trying to insult our buyers, but when you think about it, if you're walking up and there's like weeds in the front, in the front lawn, and like the door handle's a little jiggly and the windows don't close right, who cares if you have a greige color on the walls and there's some staging? They're just like, this place looks like a pile of shit and I'm going to have to live in it. And what else is wrong with it?
And I think the iBuyers really struggled with that. Like, I would go towards some of their products, like Open Door and Zillow, and they would just mess up all the little things. Like, you could just tell there was like no attention to detail, and which, when you're doing it at the scale that they were doing, it probably is a bottleneck in the business and it's hard to manage. But it was just kind of like inexcusable stuff where then when you see them struggling, it made a lot of sense.
And it's not that indifferent whether they're doing, 1,000 properties a month, or if you're a smaller investor and doing 1 or 2 properties a month. That attention to detail is the difference of people actually getting excited about your product, because the first impression that they're seeing professional pictures online, the Matterport 3D walkthrough, those pictures get them excited to get in the door. But it's like the same thing with agents. It's like there's 40,000 agents in Phoenix. Yeah. But 5% are actually really good at what they do. Like, you're like, this is a consummate professional. Like, there's such value add here. How many of them don't even pick up their phone or like return messages? Like,
I don't love talking shit about every agent because there's some good ones out there, but man, especially right now, dialing agents, it's like almost depressing. If I want to get like depressed and sad, I'll just dial down active listings that have been on market for 90 days. Like, they're not even trying to find solutions. They're just like, do you want it or not? No, the seller's not going to take less than this. Or it's like, you can just tell they're just beat up. And I don't know if it's like lack of guidance. Like, I was looking at who posted it. I think Pace posted something about like realtor school. Like, I'm not a licensed agent. You are, right?
No.
Oh, so you're not licensed either?
No.
I thought you were.
I was back in the day when I worked for other investors, but I never wanted to do traditional real estate. I had my license, I'll put it that way, but I've done a ton of listings, which gave me the skill set to be that much more particular and also direct my listing agents too.
Yeah. But when you went to, I guess, realtor school and you did get licensed, you didn't really learn about how to do real estate successly.
Right. No, you learned what an acre, which I don't even remember now, like, right. Like how
far is a fire hydrant from something or whatever.
Super important stuff we need to know,
So I think a lot of agents just, when the market was good, it's if you just, all you had to do was find someone that agreed, you could sell my house and it would get sold. But we're in a market now where it's you really got to be kind of an expert and like go out of your way to do these little things to get a house sold.
Right.
So I think a lot of agents just almost don't, they never got guidance. A lot of brokerages don't really emphasize on all these like little details about selling houses. So I just think it's there's more opportunities. I think there were probably a lot of people, like there were agents even last year that I sold a lot of houses, but didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
And I just think it's good for some of those agents to get weeded out during times like this. And
I think, and it's one of those things too, to where when the easy button, making hand over fist isn't there anymore, I don't even think, because when when you really look at how long that we've been in a seller's market for, I mean, even for like the last 5 years, a couple of the masterminds that I was in, where the lot of us are from different parts of the country, me being the most westward, we're still like, there's no way it can last this long. It can't keep going up. And I keep raising my hand year after year. I'm like, bro, we went up 20% last year. We went up 30%.
Yeah.
It just keeps going. But so I will say, like, we've been in a seller's market for 10, 11 years now.
Yeah. At some point you knew this was coming.
Right. But for people that have been in the market for less than a decade, it's like, even if you're not an expert, you need to be super resourceful. And to that, there is no excuse. Like, am I allowed to cuss here?
Yeah.
Like, if you can't pick up your fucking phone, like if you can't read a blog post, if you can't go to a meetup where people are talking about, hey, we haven't got it all figured out, but here's what we're doing in the interim, and we're sharing it at large and being vulnerable, if I can use that word, in business to say like, hey, in the interim, this is what we're doing to keep our business going, then that's on you. And that means you don't really want to be in this business. You just got attracted to what you think was super profitable and super easy, which to your point, listen, I'll say it as well, then you shouldn't be doing this, because at the end of the day, if you're kind of not in love with helping people, and I'm not trying to sound frou-frou here at all.
Yeah, like we're still trying to make money, but you have to be a professional. I mean, the way to do that though is by being a professional. And
yeah. So to bring that back to the positive side of things, like if you feel like I can be different in this marketplace by answering my phone, being a little bit more professional, having the openness with your sellers, buyers, whatever, to say, that's a great question, man. I'm not sure. Can I find out the answer and call you back in an hour? That little thing is going to separate you from the pack. Just like having professional pictures, like having your flips look that much better by adding a little designer touch here and there. It's those little things, I'm telling you guys, just done repetitively, will set you apart. It's the mindset, and it's the approach, and it's the resourcefulness. Yeah.
Even just something as simple as like, if I maybe say, hey, would the sellers be open to terms? Like, even if you don't understand what that really means and what that looks like, at least have like, okay, here's a guy, he wants to buy the house. He's trying to figure out a way to do that. My sellers want to sell the house. It's been sitting on market for a long time. Like, let me at least try to be resourceful and like try to pitch the idea, try to see if we can make this work somehow.
Right.
And I think like more of that needs to be happening right now, instead of just like
the sad trombone slide of this doesn't work.
Yeah. Like, I'm not going to pay you that. Like, what if I offer this? No, I'm not even going to present that to the seller. Well, when was the last time you presented? I know they said no to this number, but that was 2.5 months ago.
Right.
Like, do you really know like what like they need? Or I don't know. It just seems like there's a pretty big disconnect there, where I think there could be more resourceful. Like you said, there's so much shit on YouTube, podcasts, like there's no reason not to be resourceful. So in that, and I'm not interfacing with a ton of agents to that capacity, but those are the situations and opportunities, I think, where even as you as wholesalers, new or experienced, when you can form the question to empower to have these agents feel a little bit more empowered, because it's like they almost side with their sellers. Like, the market's got to come back, or I'm not going to sell it because Susie's home sold for this, and mine has better carpet, so mine is the Taj Mahal. It's like, hey man, how can we make money off of this together? You know, my pipeline's a little dry. I have a buyer that keeps bugging me about this house. They love this house, but we need to make the numbers work. How could we make that happen? I'd love to see you get paid at this before the end of this month. How would that feel? And then just shut up and see what they say. And listen, if they don't want to get paid, they don't want to get paid. But I think that sometimes when you put people in a position to make them feel like you had this really great idea, you're the hero here, and I just happen to be privy to all of that and transacting it, like that I think is perhaps maybe a little magic fairy dust that you can sprinkle in right now, just to maybe to get some traction in these conversations. Yeah. No, I think so. Yeah. Something's got to kind of change with some of these agents, but I think as time goes on, the week will get weeded out, and I'm with you. You know, it just is what it is. Yeah. So with your flips, like, how did you never came from a construction rehab background. It seems like you're pretty handy when I see you on like social media now, or don't get fooled. I'm not, or at I least, don't do the construction. Yeah. You're at least like, I see though, like, you're working with, it seems like you're pretty hands-on. Like, you don't have a GC, do you? Pardon? Do you have a GC on your project? I don't. I used to use GCs, and at this point I just sub everything out. Yeah. So how does that, how have you developed good relationships with your subs as time has gone on? That just started with, again, having GCs and being around enough to start asking good questions. I will say, and I haven't been, I've been open about discussing this, but as someone that didn't come from a construction background, and when I work behind the scenes for other investors, like they might have me get bids or something, but I never really was involved in anything when it came to like construction, right? Mm-hmm. So
honestly, all of this I had to learn on my own, but it can be really awkward. And especially as a woman that I'm like, how do I learn about this stuff, but also not look like an idiot, but also try to make sure that they know like this is my project, you know, without being overarchingly like odd about it, I guess. So what that looked like is, what can I do to stay on job sites to make myself useful, but also start asking questions around like, why are we doing this? Or, you know, I saw someone else do it this way. So can you explain to me why you're doing
being
that?
Kind of like curious.
Being curious. And the funny thing is when you find good trades and people that are like, love what they do, they're like excited to tell you about it. Because again, I think it's your approach, right? It's not like, don't do it this way. It's, hey man, why, you know, can you just explain to me? I haven't seen it done that way before. If they're good at their trade, then they're like happy to explain. No, I'm not hovering over these dudes, but like, I'm not exaggerating when I say I would bring over a bucket of window cleaner. I went to Home Depot, bought a bucket, bought a window cleaner, bought a squeegee. And I'm like, bitch, you're going to clean all the windows in this house. If it takes you 3 hours, like do it slowly so I can ask them questions. And the funny thing is when they see you and they know it's my project, it's not, you know, I'm not married. It's not a partner's. This is my house. This is my fucking project. When they see you doing that, they're like, oh, she's here. She's working. You know, it's amazing how stuff gets done when, you know, someone's actually there. So that was the way that I personally was able to differentiate myself, to be able to be like, I feel comfortable being on a job site, be able to take command, but also be like, hey, I'm curious. And I'm also not going to tell you guys how to do your job, but I also need to understand it well enough to ask questions.
Yeah.
What that eventually evolved into, and that was like when I first got started, right? But what it evolved into, I almost cried one day because one of the guys was like, hey, come here. I'm like, what's up? He's like, hey, we're framing this and da-da-da-da-da. What would you do? And Ricky, I was like such a proud project manager rehabber moment where I was like, the guys are asking me what to do now. And that's pretty common these days. But you know, it took a couple years to get there. And
there's got to be like some stigma with similar, like if my girlfriend goes and get an oil change and they're telling her to do a million things, like, I know it's not, knowing you, I know that shit's not going to work for you, right? Like, you know, pretty on the outside, but, you know.
Show me what you're doing to the oil change, yeah.
But did you experience a lot of that, though, with contractors?
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely I've had nightmare stories, but it happened when I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to vet contractors. And now that like, this is what I teach in Flip School, where I'm like, hey, here's the questions that you need to ask. Male, female, that part doesn't matter as much. Show them you're
serious.
Yeah. Show them you're serious. But then also having that learning curve of having the nightmare contractors. Luckily, I haven't had many, but it's enough to be like, I am never doing that again. And once you give them an inch, they take a mile. But, you know, I also am like, also as a female, I don't want to have to be something I'm completely not, right? And so I feel like, listen, if you find the right people doing the right job, I pay them fairly and empower them to do a good job. But this isn't a democracy. This is my project. This is how things need to go. This is the budget I'm staying in. And if something comes up that none of us could have predicted, we'll talk about it, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like, I think that they care less that you're a female. And in fact, I've actually noticed a couple instances, like for instance, I don't let people come in my projects. I know some guys are like, oh, you can come in my project and talk to my subs. I'm not a big person. Like I don't want strangers because I'm there a lot by myself.
Yeah.
So it's a safety issue for me. And I tell the guys that and I post signs. And there's been a couple times where neighbors have walked in or someone walks in and I see them kind of post up, like they get kind of protective. So that's also been a cool thing. And I just want to put it out there because a lot of girls, I think, end up being afraid to get into the construction end of it because they're afraid of being taken advantage of. Well, you got to educate yourself. Like, listen, I'm on YouTube. I watch this old, like I'm on YouTube watching videos. I watch This Old House. I read blogs. I follow construction people on TikTok. I'm open about the fact that I was ignorant coming into this and I've had to go the extra mile to be able to educate myself. And I was willing to look stupid on job sites and ask a ton of questions, but I don't know how many people are, and I don't know how many people were. But when they see you, I'm literally sweating in the middle of July, helping them unload tile. And I'm doing shit like that. Like they change. Like that makes a difference.
It'll go a long way for those guys.
It goes a long way. And then when they see that and start asking me questions like, hey, how do we do this? Or what's funny to me is they're like, I don't know about this. And then they see it come together. They're like, okay, now I get it. Like we were really worried about how this was going to look. I'm like, I get it. Just trust the process. But that's really like the genesis of getting to the point now where I just have all my own subs. And that's not to say like, listen, I'm not an expert. Like I'm not a construction expert. You don't need to be, but I just know how to ask better questions. I know what the directive, I know the, chain of operations. So it's just a matter of, I think, getting out of a place of fear and moving into, I'm going to do this. So how am I going to do this? Yeah. And how do I find, vet, and keep the best people around me, but also set a precedence that like, I'm not going to take your shit. Like it kind of bothers me. I'm on a little bit of a tangent here, but when people are like, oh, this is a family, like I'm not your fucking mom, dude. Like,
yeah,
like this isn't a family. Like this is a team to me.
Yeah.
And you're either on the field, on the bench, or C string, right? And if you're not doing your job, it's a phone call. Someone else is. So I think people pick up on that too, where it's like, I'm not mean. I don't have to be, something that I'm not, but it does take a certain skill set and demonstrativeness to be able to like keep guys in line, be on project sites.
You got to be a little like pushy with subs too. There's an art to it to make sure subs get things done in appropriate time fashion.
Yeah.
Stay focused on your project.
1000%. And that's not to say like everything still goes according to plan. Like that's just not the nature of the business, but you just have to approach it in such a way that the majority of the time it is.
Yeah. I know you said a couple horror stories. Like, what would you say, like for someone who's brand new, maybe they're kind of scared. They're stuck in that learning stage. They're like, God, I'm going to hire some subs. They're going to rip me off. You hear all these horror stories.
Yeah. Any
like good tips or stories about when you were starting out new?
Oh God. Yeah. Let's go to the tips. Well, okay. So stories are always fun. I had one guy that I found him, I think this was forever ago, but yeah, on Craigslist. And he was like, I can start at, 5:00 in the morning tomorrow morning. So I'll call you from Home Depot. And, 5:00 never came. And of course I'm like up and ready and, excuses after excuse. And so finally it's whatever time it was and he gets there. And just this was super cosmetic. He was just a handyman, not just a handyman, but he was a handyman. And there was like leftover beer at the fridge. And I'm talking, it could have been years old. And he starts drinking the beer in the fridge.
Jeez.
Like gross old beer. And so when I show up and I'm just walking the property, here's what's, it's funny. It's like a joke. Trades always complain about other trades work. Like the electrician's always like, fucking drywall guy didn't do it right.
It's never their fault.
It's never their fault. And then they're also like critiquing all the other trades. It's comical to be honest. But anyway, it's not normal for the guys to talk shit about each other. And these guys were like, this guy's giving us weird vibes. So for them to say that is a huge sign. Well, where I went wrong is I didn't vet him like how I teach people to vet contractors now. And I also didn't trust my instinct because I was like, I don't think I like this guy. But I thought, oh, he said he's available, so I could use him and nothing could go wrong. And I went against that instead of just like, no, there's a lot of handymen. And even if I have to wait a couple days, I'll make phone calls. And even if I have to pay a little bit more, it's worth it. Right? Like you're going to pay for all of this one way or the other.
Sure.
With your sanity, with your paycheck, with the quality of work, having to get it redone. Like you get to choose how you want to pay for this. There's the ugly pots and then there's the pot to choose from where it's like better and healthier. So I didn't vet him well enough, and then I didn't trust my instinct, and I didn't fire him fast enough. What that ended up being is him writing me a 3-page letter of, you owe me more money, and I'm not a drunk, I'm not a drug addict, don't judge me. And he's just unsolicited, just barfing all of this. And basically like, if you don't do this, I'm going to ruin you. And I was with someone at the time, and he was just like, just pay this dude to have him gone. That is not worth it to you. And it was less than like $1,000. It wasn't like a new huge contract or anything. I had never had anything like that happen, nor have I since. But it was one of those things that made such an impression that I'm like, I can see all the things that I did wrong. And here's how I'm never going, here's why I'll never do that again. And here's how I can do it better. And strangely enough, things got better from there, meaning I vet people and don't go against those rules anymore. So for those of you watching, I don't want to say like, oh, things can go well 1,000% of the time just by doing that. Like the thing about it is people can get into drugs or alcohol or go through a bad divorce. Contractors are notorious for spending their money before they really have it. They're going and getting
down payments and they go buy some shit.
They don't have a big float. Yeah. So it's just like, if they know that they can kind of get that from you before it's actually due, because you're like the nice guy or the nice girl, then they misappropriate it. So I don't want to say like, hey, this is a fail safe, but 90% of the time it's going to go so much better and you can avoid those nightmare stories. It's just like why people don't like doing property man. Like I don't want to own rentals because it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
No, it's a nightmare because you're a nightmare. Like you don't know what you're doing. But if you did, you're going to eliminate the vast majority of the headaches that people that are uneducated to it have. And that's the key word right there, is just uneducated, so that can be solved. Get educated, implement it, and, run your business accordingly.
Yeah. And I think too, like no one's perfect. I've talked to so many people on here, successful real estate investors, and I hardly talk to anyone who's like, nah, every sub I've ever hired has just been great. And
yeah,
everyone always has a story. So I think you just have to understand too, like at some point that's going to happen. And then, you're going to learn from mistakes and kind of push forward, but you got to just kind of, be smart about it as well, and try to work with like the right types of people. We had this one sub when we first started doing like Flip Lab and social media. He followed us and he was doing flooring, and he did flooring for like a while for us, and we're like posting like 50K profit, 100K profit, and then the next flooring job he like charges us double, and we're like, dude, what are you doing?
He like brings up your TikTok.
Yeah, and he's like, well, you guys are making so much money off these flips that it seems like I could charge more.
What did you guys do?
That was his last job.
Yeah,
we were like, dude, like don't be looking in our pockets. Like, all of a sudden, if we lose money on a flip, then and like we're not making money, do we pay you less to do the flooring? So I just think, you got to kind of just align yourself with people doing kind of the right things. But
to your point, things could change.
Yeah.
So again, it's not uncommon for people to, get a job on a crew because they don't want to run their own business anymore, or go through a divorce, or go get in an accident, whatever the case is. So it's not a fail safe, but you just have to pay attention. And that's actually pretty common for those prices to creep up because the prices have been the same. Like I don't do formal budgets anymore because you just get used to the cost.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, when you line itemize stuff, you're like, you guys are charging me more now. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, if certain stuff goes up in price, it makes sense. But
yeah.
I think it comes to like being reasonable with the subs and trying to figure out pricing and things like that.
Right.
Do you get like a lot of bids typically, or do you just at this point kind of work with your subs that you like working with?
A little bit of both. So I'm always looking for good trades. I usually like to have like 2 or 3, and that can be dependent on, some of them only like to work in certain areas of the valley just because they don't want to be driving all over Maricopa County all day. So for that reason, but then also I just think it's healthy when you're beholden to someone and that's your only electrician. You're like, well, then I'm stuck with them if they have to push me back a week or so, or their pricing has gone up so astronomically. That's not consummate to like what the rest of the industry is doing, know? So I always like to have 2 or 3 people. And then also there's been instances where they like want to keep pushing something back. And I'm like, listen, man, I got 4 other people behind you that can't do something until you're done. And Susie Homemaker decide, and I'm saying homeowner decided that they wanted something else done to their kitchen that wasn't in their original scope. And now you want to back. And I'm like, that doesn't fly with me. Like, I'm not like that. We need to stay on schedule. She can get pushed back or he can get pushed back. So when that happens, I'm like, if I need to get someone else in here, I will, because this is a daily thing. Like, I don't think in terms of weeks or months. Like, we have to think of every day I have a holding cost here.
Yeah. It's costing you money for it to just sit there if they're on vacation or they're just, at some other job site.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do like working. I mean, I have a pretty solid crew of people, but I always like to keep, 2 or 3 in the pocket. And again, depending on the area of the valley or what their other schedules are.
Yeah, especially during these times. I've been talking to a lot of people, and a big concern is like keeping their guys busy.
Yeah.
And because if not, then they might go find someone else. But also it's like, there's not as many jobs overall right now.
Right. And so that's part of it is I don't have a construction crew that just works for me. I'm not high volume, and I've always been really vocal about that, because just like I had high overhead at one point where I had an EA and I had multiple virtual assistants. I had office space. I had all these things. And it just seemed to me that when I dialed it back a little bit and just run really lean and mean, I didn't need as high as volume. If you have good margins, if you're mindful of your overhead and you don't have a bunch of lifestyle creep, you can do really well with it. And so that was one thing I'm like, I'm not going to get caught in a position to where I have to keep buying properties just to keep a crew busy. Now, the trade-off with that is I don't always get preferential treatment on schedule because, if they have 5 or 6 other things going on, I might have to wait a week before they can come to mine. Yeah. But it just, it balances out. And that's also why you have different subs that you can, go back to. But I just think it's, people sometimes don't understand how capital intensive flipping can be. And especially if you're trying to do like a good job at it, that trying to do a ton of volume, your margins typically get compressed.
Yeah. And I've always kind of been more on the side of staying lean and not doing a lot of projects, but just like having ones being super profitable. And like at one point we had like 6 sales guys. Now we're back to like 2. And I don't know. I just kind of I think overall, lower kind of stress, more freedom. Even if I don't do as many deals, it's like, who cares?
Is that harder?
Does it really matter?
Is that harder for you to, I don't want to say admit, but is that harder for you, do you think? Because I see a lot of people in our space that it's just like, I did 100 deals last month, or, I flipped this many houses last year. And I'm always like, did you rehab them or did you flip the paper? So that's part of it. And I don't care. But as a guy,
I try to not get like too caught up in that whole thing. I think once you start like trying to chase what everyone else is doing, it's a road to no happiness or whatever. The guy that owns his office, his name's Ricky too, and he's younger than me, has a private jet, is worth like tens of millions. Yeah. Like if I start,
I think I saw your TikTok.
Yeah. If I start like I think getting in the space of like, what's that guy doing? And like, trying to compete with everyone else. I don't think that's a successful way to kind of like live your life. And I think everyone's different. Like for me, it's more about having a little bit more freedom. Yeah. And not having a bunch of people to kind of answer to. And I just think if you do scale and you want to grow, it comes with a lot of those other headaches. Now I have all these people and personalities to worry about, and I have to put food on their table, where if it's like just like me, I'll be like, dude, whatever, if you don't do a deal for like a month, you're good.
Right.
But if I have a team of 5 or 10 people, like, no, that's not cool. Like we have to do deals just so they can feed their families and stuff like that.
Whether or not you're actually making money from that either.
Yeah. And we've never gone super high in overhead, but I think it's like, especially when the market was good, everyone around me was screaming like scale.
Of course.
And I was like, looking back, I probably would have made definitely like more money. And
sure.
But at the same time, like we also haven't lost any money during this time, when a lot of the people that did scale super fast, I'm still talking to them. They still got, 20, 30 houses of inventory and hard money payments. And
that's ugly.
I'm just happy like I never got in that type of a stressful situation for myself, I guess.
And that speaks volumes to, like you said, I like how you put it, like quieting the noise a little bit and not trying to always compete with other people's success. And that's, it sounds a little cliche at this point, but it's also so true. And I think it's difficult for content creators and also like us as actual professional real estate investors to be really honest and frank. And I feel like that's where I try to be really honest when I'm on, whether I'm talking to you or on like a public panel or something where I'm like, you don't have to be high volume to do well in this business. Now, well can mean a little bit different for me than it does for you. But overall, I think most people are really satisfied to have a little bit more bandwidth in their life, like their actual life, and have a successful business that nurtures and supports that, rather than, hey, I closed 100 deals last year, but my health is really out of whack. My relationships are super strained. Like personally, I'm not doing really well, but here I am with all this success in front of and around me. There's a time and a place for that. I'm not trying to like say it's right or it's wrong. I just try to bring to the table, like, listen, if I can be an example of creating a life from your business and not just trying to put up the most gross volume, then I think a lot of other people can do that too. Like, listen, even if you only do 2-3 flips a year, like you can make a 6-figure income.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's not unreasonable, but it's hard not to get caught up in that. And a lot of people are like, I want to do 10 flips a year, or I want to do 50 flips a year. And I'm like, do a couple, see if you like it, and go from there. You might decide that that's not actually what you want to do at all.
Yeah. And too, I've learned just being on social media, like, don't believe everything you see. Like
100%.
Number of deals and gross income versus net income versus who knows who has money partners. And there's just like a lot into the equation where I think you have to just kind of figure out like what makes sense for you. And I typically, when I talk to people, like I envy the people that seem like they have a lot of time on their hands. They like tomorrow, they're like, I might do this or I might do that. Like my schedule is like pretty free. I can kind of do whatever I want. Like I envy that more than the person who's like doing 200 deals a month, but they have an office of like 50 sales guys and they're, 9 to 5 every day and grinding on the phones and stuff like that. I mean, if that's what juices them and that's what makes them feel fulfilled, there's counterbalances in their life. Like if they're married, there's gotta be conversations around like, this is what, fulfills me. And I think that there are certain people that do really well with that. I also don't think that that's the majority of people. And I think if you really gave them that opportunity and then gave them exposure to that, like that Jim Carrey quote where he talks, I wish everyone could be rich and famous so you could understand that that's not really what makes you happy. Yeah. But listen, if you need to experience that, just as I'm sitting here relaxed and saying, oh, you don't need to be high volume. Like I am a reformed maybe not reformed, but like I was a really bad workaholic, really bad workaholic. And that's because I came from, I've worked mostly with men, not blaming it on them, but I'm saying like working behind the scenes for other investors and then getting into this space. Like, I'm just like, I have to make this work. Absolutely. Whatever it takes, this is going to work. And I went at it, like not looking back, hair on fire for, however long I was doing that for, a long time. But only then, after having experienced that, could I say like, okay, I was really intentional about making sure I created passive income and like, I'm not going to do this forever, but now I'm in the position to be able to say that. So I don't want to come up here and be like, oh, just be relaxed about it and don't worry. It's not about that. I think what we're both trying to say is have an intentionality around what it is that you're actually trying to create. And does that align with what fulfills you? If that's a huge business, kill it. Yeah. If it's not, be honest with yourself about it. Yeah, I'll always say like real estate was never something I was super passionate about, but when I saw what I could do with real estate and the lifestyle that I wanted to create, it made a lot of sense that I could create the life that I wanted and use real estate kind of as the vehicle to do it. Amen. So I know you teach a lot of like new people how to get into flipping, right? You have a program or a... I do. So I didn't before. I mean, a lot of my social media just shows what I was doing day to day. But recently, finally, middle of last year, I created and launched Flip School. So for those people that are actually interested in learning how to flip, I finally have something that I can direct them towards, that I'm involved. So you do have exposure to an active real estate flipper investor. But that was sort of my flagship product. No, like, I love talking to people who help new people get into it, because I think they have really good insight on what makes some people successful and they might take it and, they're flipping houses, making some money, changing their life, and other people that just kind of don't do anything with it. any like correlations of what you've seen with your coaching as far as the types of people, or like what's the most important skill set for them to develop to actually see success when it comes to flipping houses?
One thing that sticks out why people primarily want to get into it is that they think it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And because they've seen the shows, and well, I mean, it's really, there is something really satisfying about taking, a blank slate or taking a hoarder house and turning it into something really cool. I mean, it's pretty inspirational in and of itself. So I think a lot of people are attracted to that, damning everything else from, up until that point that it actually takes to get into it. So there's nothing wrong with that, but I would encourage people for that not to be the driving force. I mean, you could go do a makeover on one of the houses or one of the rooms in your own houses if you need to kind of scratch that itch or do a DIY project. But the people that I see do better with it are those that understand this isn't necessarily easy and you have to stick to your principles because you're going to hear a lot of no's. Your contracts are going to get rejected a lot. There is nuance if you're doing seller direct marketing and you're the one having those conversations, or even if like I'm buying from you as a wholesaler, if you're, if you're coming back and the seller can't accept that offer, I might have to have that experience to have that conversation to try to like help us all get the deal done.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that resourcefulness. So the people that are willing to take the little baby rejections a lot and stick through it and not afraid to get into like the awkward position of like dealing with contractors if you're not used to that, and just be resourceful within themselves to say, I know that I don't have all of the skills right now, but I'm willing to learn and I'm going to stick to the principles and just trust the process and go through it.
Yeah, and it is tough. I think that's why like a big thing I do on social media is post live calls, and it's mostly rejection. It's mostly like the no calls.
Yeah.
Or like the ones where people are cursing at me and stuff.
Yeah.
Just because I think people need to see that. Like that's what most of the business is. Like if you're going to go direct to seller and try to get deals, and it's, do you have the stomach for it? And a lot of people like, they say they do, but then when they get on the phones and it's like day after day of rejection, it's really tough. Like any sales job is tough. I've had multiple, but real estate's even more tough because like you might get rejection for like 30 straight days, like all no's. And you're looking for like that one yes, possibly, compared to even if you work like a solar job, or like I used to sell like advertising for Yelp, like little ads. I knew like anyone I was going to get a deal in a small window of time, like maybe a day or two, but something was going to close, even if it was a tiny deal.
Right.
Like I was talking to a solar guy. He's like, yeah, every day I know if I knock this many doors, I'll at least get like a couple sales. Those couple sales at least make you feel good. You go home and you're like, all right, I got a couple sales going. In real estate though, you go, I don't know, 30, 60 days with just a bunch of no's. At some point you're like, is there ever going to be a yes?
Right.
So it's a tough business.
It is. And it can be months before you get your first deal, especially with flipping. I mean, it could be 6 months, 8 months before you actually get a paycheck, depending.
Right.
So there is a lot of rejection involved, but I also think it's the process. Again, like we were talking about dealing with contractors, that's a huge hurdle and a bottleneck for a lot of people. And it's just not something that I think a ton of people can really stomach at first glance. But it's like, again, if you just needed the education to be able to do that, and you're willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit, then you can get over that hurdle too. Like nothing is so insurmountable that you can't figure it out. But where you and I see the difference with people is who's actually willing to step in that gap and look stupid for a little bit or get rejected or as a cold caller, be told to fuck off, it's like if you're not being told that once a day, you're probably not doing your job right as a salesperson because you're not talking to enough people.
Yeah.
So as far as flipping goes, it's the rejection of, having a bunch of contracts turned down, it taking months to maybe find a deal that has enough margin in it to make sense for you, but then also dealing with contractors and then directing the sale at the end, because a lot of people think that your job is done once the house is pretty. You're like, oh, I got to be a designer. I got to be a flipper. It's like, honey, no, that's when the real money starts, because you need to direct this like a hawk. You don't know if that buyer's agent just got their license.
Yeah.
Or if they've been in the business for 20 years. Like your responsibility ends when the wires have gone out and settled in everyone's bank accounts.
Yeah. And I see too, I think new flippers sometimes, they just they want to get to that moment and then they end up buying like a bad deal or a super tight deal.
That's a great point.
And I just think I try to emphasize this with anyone's new. Like I always want to push people like, fuck it, go do it. What's the worst thing that happens? Like, you know, at least you're taking action. But at the same time, like that first flip, like take however long it takes, like buy something that's like super deep, easy. Like it should be kind of like a layup type deal where then it will incentivize you to actually make it to your second flip or your third flip. Because I see a lot of people, they're like one and dones.
That's
the first one was a nightmare.
Point. And I think, well, tell me what you see, but I think a lot of it has to deal with them having dealt with that rejection and then also getting really excited because now they have the opportunity to hear that yes. And it'll figure itself out. Market's going up, but they're also trusting the numbers of the person that they sent it to. Yeah. And I don't care how many deals you've done with a wholesaler or an agent that's maybe been sending you deals. At the end of the day, they're not the one taking the risk. You are. So you have to have that skill set to be able to comp a property. Like, I don't care, however you need to get access to the MLS or a comping tool, that's just part of your cost of business. But I do see that where people are like, oh, I just trusted the numbers and, you know, it ended up not being a good deal. I'm like, well, you know, you should have taken a step back and waited long enough to say, I need to be able to look at this, whether it's an hour or a day, instead of just getting excited. I think that's where the difference comes in. Yeah,
I think there's some discipline there as far as just, with the underwriting, it's like I underwrite like worst case scenarios.
Right.
You know, so I'll talk to either wholesalers or agents. I'm like, nah, like, oh, what about that comp? I don't care about that comp. That's like the highest comp. I'm excluding that. I'm going off the lowest comp.
Word.
So like, well, you know, and I think, especially if you're brand new, it's, there, as you do more deals and you acquire more assets, then you have maybe a little bit more wiggle room, right? Like where I could take on a risk where if I lose money on this or maybe break even or not make as much money, but you know what, like, let's just do it anyway. But if you're brand new, it's like you should not be putting yourself in that position because things will go wrong. You're not going to make the relationships with probably the best contractors your first go around.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
But yeah, sometimes you see a lot of them, like they buy a deal that was sent to them from like an agent or a wholesaler and they kind of trusted their numbers. And you
finally get to say you're doing a flip.
Yeah, like people want to do that. Like I had a friend last year that that's where he was and he bought a deal and it was like when you couldn't lose money on a flip in Phoenix. You know, he bought a flip. It was like, I was like, I don't love the deal, but ended up making 60 grand off it, sold 40K over asking, like everything was. But then he buys another flip. And that one doesn't go nearly as well. It's like he like lost 60K on that.
I'm seeing a lot of that happen.
So I think it was, once again though, after he bought that first one, he never really, like he wasn't like hunting as hard as he should. I'm like, dude, it's not always going to be this easy. Like you got to be underwriting a lot of deals before you really close on it. Like it shouldn't be as simple as just.
Well, and that's, I think, part of it. Like, I like how you're putting it out there, like your rejection calls. And it's the same thing. Like, people maybe need to better understand, I'm saying no, or I'm looking at a ton of deals and it's not the majority of them that are worth taking down because I don't deal high volume. So I'm particular about projects and it needs to make sense all day long. And people, I don't think realize that. They just see like when we got projects going on and it's like, well, yeah, honey, it took 100, offers to be able to maybe get to that one. Yeah. People, that like this past, like I've only done 2 deals in like the past like 6 weeks, but like one was, like we bought for 32K and we're going to sell for like 130. Not fix it. The other one, like we bought for 88 and going to sell for like 135. Man.
And not fix it. Those are like really good deals. And people are like, oh damn, like how do you find those deals? I'm like, the one was from like a probate attorney that I've been talking to and building a relationship for like 2 years.
Right.
The other was from like an old mail campaign after we sent out $20,000 of mailers and like it finally clicked. But like, you know how many phone calls in between and how many deals I looked at that I said no to in order to just get like those 2.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of time just gets spent there and kind of like unseen time.
I think that so if you don't have to have a high school diploma, college degree, real estate background to get into this business, there has to be some sort of barrier to entry. And that is your barrier to entry. Are you willing to stick it out, gut it out, repetitively do the reps when you feel like shit, get rejected constantly, keep hearing no, the market's changing, everyone's saying like, this is dumb that you're doing this. Why don't you go out and party? Why aren't you doing X, Y, Z? And you're like, because I've been told that if I keep doing this, something will come out of it. And it might take 3 months, 6 months, a year. Sometimes I see people that get in the curiosity phase and then the educational phase, the implementation phase. And it's like 2.5 years, 2 years.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah. And I think that is a healthy timeline. I mean, I say that as a good example, but you don't start to see those little buds grow until you've put in all that deep work, sometimes in the dark for a long time. And then people are like, well, how did you do that? Well, go to the gym and do 50,000 reps. However you need to break that up, go do 50,000 reps and come back to me and then ask me your next question.
Yeah. People don't see even like the years prior. Like I said, I tell people like I opened up my first real estate book in 2017. I bought a rental in like end of 2018. I did my first wholesale deal end of 2019. Did my first flip like midway through or early 2020. So it's like, from that first time of like picking up a real estate book, I mean, you're talking years.
Right.
Like, it's not just like this quick, like, oh, okay, let's get into this. And after a week, we're going to find a deal and we're going to start flipping it. Like, it shouldn't be that quick of a process.
Well, and I think part of it is on social media, seeing how there's a lot of CRM and dialers and texting services and, whatever niche that you're in, there's all of this automation that can implement that. And I'm not saying that can't shorten the timeline, but again, let's keep going back to like the rejection and doing the reps.
Can't escape the work.
You can't escape the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So love that. Tracy, if people want to find you, what's the best place to reach out if they got deals in Phoenix? You are, an actual buyer here.
Right.
So if someone's got, maybe they're a wholesaler, they want to send you a deal. What's like the best way to reach
I love
out
working with wholesalers. So my handle is the same across across all social media. Royce, spelled R-O-Y. Y is in Yankee, C is in Charlie, E is in Echo. Royce of real estate. And I will say there are scammers, like scam profiles.
Instagram is getting really like
so bad,
but it's almost like intentionally bad. Like they could clearly fix this issue and they don't. And
I hate that I even have to waste our valuable time like on your podcast to talk about that. But my original, my actual pages are under Royce of Real Estate, and you can always DM me there. And yes, across, I'm mostly on Instagram and TikTok.
Awesome, Tracy. Thanks for coming on.